But thank you very much. We'll make a start. Thanks, everyone, for joining us, and welcome to our latest Be Part of the Equation event. A particular welcome to those who it's their first event. For those people, just a sort of bit of description about what this is. So Be Part of the Equation is a network for analysts and people who are interested in data across the Essex public sector. We use it to sort of share knowledge, learn from one another, and just come together and talk all things data, really. My name is Duncan Taylor. I work at the County Council in the Performance and Business Intelligence team, but I've seconded into ECTA at the moment, particularly to work on our capability programme. And I was given a task to pull together a session on data visualisation. Sort of one of the, and at the end of this session, I'll sort of make a shout out for sort of what other topics you'd like us to cover. So I think I'm really pleased with how it's come together. We've got three really good speakers who I'll introduce in a moment for you. As they're speaking, we'll leave the chat open, so there will be a time for questions at the end of each of the presentations, but if you want to post your message rather than say it at the end in the chat, I'll monitor that and I can relay those to the speakers for you. We are scheduled in for the 2 hours. That'll be the maximum we go. We'll definitely be finished definitely by 4, so we'll see how time goes, but we're programmed to finish before 4. And so I guess without any further ado, our three speakers today, we've got a number of subjects around data visualization that we wanted to share with you today. So I'm really pleased about who we've got to come speak to us. So we have Jane Crowe, who I'll introduce in a moment, from ONS. She's a National Programme Manager for the Data Science Campus, and she'll be talking to us about data visualization in the public sector, show us some good examples across government, and talk a bit about what they're doing around sort of raising people's skills and capability around this agenda, things for us to maybe follow up on at a later date. We then have Richard Charnock, Senior Performance Analyst from Essex Police, who will be talking us through their dashboard in a day, which I'm looking forward to. And then we're going to move on to Dr. Dave Clark from Essex University, and he's going to be covering sort of data visualization in R, something he runs as part of their summer school. There's almost a bit of a taster today to what you can expect in that. And got Rachel, who's I can see on my screen. Hi, Rachel. Rachel went on the summer school last summer, so I was going to bring her in after that presentation, just to say a bit about how someone who's gone on through that found it, and particular things that she found useful in that. So that's sort of our agenda. I hope that's okay with everyone. That's what you were expecting. And so without any further ado, I'm a few minutes earlier than my 10 past. That's brilliant, on track already. Hand over to Jane Crowe, who, as I said, is a sort of National Programme Manager for the Data Science Campus. And you can say a bit more about what that is, Jane, as I hand over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Duncan, and good afternoon, everybody. Just checking you can see my presentation there.
Yeah, got that, Jane.
See that? I'm just making it, put it into presenter view. The point where I stop being able to see all of you and only see my presentation. So there, is that okay? You can see that okay? And I won't be able to see the chat now, so do feel free to interrupt and give me a shout, Duncan, if there's any questions that pop up as I go. Happy to be interrupted or save them to the end. I really don't mind. So yeah, well, thank you for inviting me here today. I'm Jane Crowe. I'm National Programme Manager at the Data Science Campus at the ONS, and I work to help build data science capability in government and public sector organisations, and also to support and grow the data science community. So I feel the burden of responsibility being the first person to speak today, but I'm going to talk in a fairly general way about the role of data visualization in public sector, some of the possibilities, and some key things to consider when producing data visualizations. And as Duncan said, I'll also look at a few examples around. I'm going to be talking very much around sort of the impact and building capability of Dataviz. I'm not a data scientist or an analyst myself. You'll have the real experts talking after me in this session. So this is really an introduction in a sort of the headlines around it, how it can have impact in the way it's used, and how we can build capability for yourselves as individuals or your organisations. So just really quickly, I know I don't need to talk about what is data visualization. You all know, I'm sure, but there's a wide range of options when it comes to data visualization. Obviously, maps, graphs, charts, diagrams, sometimes very colourful. But as we know, it's not all about bright coloured bubble charts, and often a simple bar graph or a table is the effective option. But essentially, it's about the way in which data have become available, often in real time over recent years, means it can be used brilliantly to shape policy quickly, enable better decisions for our population. Policymakers rely on trusted official government statistics when making decisions, and local data obviously is also important for benchmarking, comparisons amongst local communities and neighbouring communities, and all of this influences policy and the design of services for our citizens. So, but it still would be good to just start to take a quick moment to reflect on what data visualization is. We sometimes run workshops with non-technical people, or people of varying awareness around this. And some of the answers we get are things like visual representation of numbers and patterns, making data digestible, communicating in a non-technical way, tables and graphs, presenting complex information simply, and improving engagement. And they're just a few, and all of those are correct. It's all of the above. And in addition to that, there's one that I particularly like, which is that it's data for people who don't like data. And why this picture? I'm not suggesting for a minute that Winston Churchill didn't like data, but this is a quote from a member of the DWP digital team who created the fantastic Churchill app. I don't know if some of you might be familiar with this, but it's a brilliant tool that uses a range of open data sources to allow policymakers to safely explore the data by geography, time, and characteristics, and to develop data-driven and evidence-based policy. They called it Churchill because Churchill created the Central Office for Statistics, I think it was called, but it was all about increasing the use of statistics across and aligning across government. So that's what they felt this app did. So ultimately, it's about providing an accessible way for our users to understand stories and trends in the data we present and publish. We have lots of information and data available to us, but it's only useful if it's conveyed in a way that people can understand. And if we make our data easy to understand, our users are more likely to read it and remember it and interpret it correctly. And this increases the impact of what we present, and is helping, in general, information become more transparent and accessible to society. So there's a wealth of guidance and resources available, and I'll provide some links to some useful ones later, and I'm happy to share the presentation so you've got those afterwards. So I'm not going to go into detail in all of that, and as I say, I'm sure the speakers who are coming after me will go into some more detail, but just to go through some of the high-level considerations that should be your starting point when deciding to produce any data visualization. So first of all, what's the question? What story do you want to tell? Or what do you want to ask? What do you want to say about your data? Or what do you want to ask of your data? And really, really important, who is your audience? The audience of your data visualization will determine many of the decisions you make in how you go about designing your data visualization. What message do you want to communicate with the data? And then from those questions, you will be able to choose the right visual tool that supports your message. There'll always be a range of graph options, or a range of different options of what tool you can use. But those three questions that you've started with will influence what decision you make around that, and what will be the best tool to tell the statistical story you want to tell. And then try and test. Really, really important. Data visualization is most effective, I think, from anecdotally, from hearing from people who do it well, when it's an iterative process. You know, just try something, do something quickly, try it, show it, share it, test it with colleagues, test it with users, and then get their feedback, and then take it to the next stage, improve it, develop it. It can be perfectly usable, but then you can add on some more functionality, add on a new data set to make it do something different. That iterative process can be really, really effective. And of course, apply best practice, and just some real headlines there. There are lots of sophisticated, complicated solutions to Dataviz, but often keeping it simple and less is more. Thinking about concise annotation, accessible fonts. I noticed it was in one of Duncan's slides when the Tony Hawk music was playing there, but avoiding 3D and lighting effects because they can mislead and skew the data. And the accessibility of charts in terms of hosting, you know, thinking about is HTML available to you, or are you going to need to post it as a picture? Those kind of things. What will make it most accessible? And obviously the use of colour, and there's masses of information around that available. And so, of course, in the last couple of years, we've really seen the rise of the dashboard. I think dashboards were big years ago, then they became unfashionable, and now they've never been more important and popular than they are now. So I'm going to stop talking at this point for a few minutes, and I'm going to let you listen to our national statistician, Sir Ian Diamond. We're currently rolling out a programme of data literacy for senior leaders called the Data Masterclass, and the senior leaders across government and public sector. So I'm going to play you an extract from that programme where Sir Ian gives his thoughts about dashboards and Dataviz in general. So this is the part where I have to change screens and hope that it all works. So I'm going to stop sharing the presentation, and I'm going to hopefully share Sir Ian. I'm crossing my fingers this is going to work. Now, can you see Sir Ian for starters?
Yes.
Oh, wait a minute, I just need to make sure I've turned on the sound. Right, hopefully he's on.
Now, from graphs to dashboards, one of the great trends, and one of the great brilliant trends of the last few
Oh, he's disappeared, Jane.
has been the increasing
Okay,
dashboards. I am an enormous fan of dashboards. They're fantastic because you can get data in real time, you can have interactivity, and you have the power to bring large amounts of data from multiple sources really, really quickly. So far, so good. But you absolutely need to know something about the topic. Don't just give the numbers. You need metadata, you need skills management. One of the real problems with dashboards is that you can have a data deluge, not insight. So you need to think very carefully. Am I getting the message across about what is going on? And they often need to be adapted to focus on important issues. Important issues may change, so don't give the same story tomorrow as you gave today. Think what the key elements are in policy. And then also ask yourself, is the dashboard the right thing to do? The first thing to remember is all the rules that I've just given you for data visualization hold again. So let's push on. Look at these dashboards. Isn't this beautiful? What's the local situation in your area? You've got it very, very clear and can be seen very quickly. Now, I'm going to move on and move from dashboards to saying a few words about some of the public data briefings that were held during the pandemic. And at ONS, we were privileged to help with improving the presentation of charts, the transparency of the data sources, and also improving the quality assurance of the data. And so let's just look at these two graphs. The before is on the left-hand side and looks at transport use change over time in March and April 2020. The right-hand side is the one after some work by some colleagues at ONS. Let's look at some of the ways in which it changed. The first thing, look at the axis. On the right-hand side, we start the axis at 100%. You actually can see what the real scale of the decline has been in transport use over time. Are you interested in the impact of particular policies? So on the lower graph, right-hand side, a block in, a line in to show you when the lockdown was and what happened. You can really make use of blocks to tell you what the graphs are. On the right-hand side, you can see bus transport for London and National Rail much, much clearer. And finally, you've got some really good, clear metadata which tell you about the sources. Think carefully about what you are conveying. The public require transparency, and rightly so. They require to know where the data come from, and they want to understand the data very, very easily. In exactly the same way, if you look at the left-hand graph, well, it looks a bit like a plate of spaghetti, and it can be quite hard to really understand what is going on. It's looking at hospitalisation in different regions of England and in Wales, Northern Ireland, during the period, and in Scotland during the period of the first wave of the pandemic. I would submit that if you, instead of the left-hand graph, look at the right-hand one, where you can see very clearly which colour is which, you get a sense of the trends. So the really steep peak in London, the much flatter peaks in the southwest. You can see very, very clearly where the pandemic was most affecting people and the major trends. Incredibly important to do this, and it was a real privilege for my colleagues to be able to work so closely with the communications team in number 10 to be able to improve the communications of these graphs. So look, it's been a pleasure to spend this time with you discussing some, what to me is just beautiful data, but the data are beautiful only when they are pictured very, very, very clearly. So just remember, what's the question I'm trying to ask? Am I answering the question in a transparent and clear way to my audience? Dashboards, absolutely brilliant, but don't have a data deluge. Think about the insight. And when you are communicating with the public, think about transparency, think about clarity, think about simplicity, think about metadata, and most importantly, think about the message.
Okay. So I'll go back to my okay. So from that, how does all this play out in real life? I've got a few quick examples to show you. Again, I won't go into the details of these projects themselves, but just want to highlight some of the ways data visualization can have impact, and also some particular areas that are worth consideration as well. So the first example is an example from Welsh Government, who wanted to look at rates of road accidents where road users are killed or seriously injured, and to track their progress towards their goal, which was actually a UN Sustainable Development Goal of halving the number of deaths by 2020. So this is a few years old, this piece of work, this case study. But they did a piece of analysis using a sample from the Swansea area and using DFT data mapped against ONS settlement classifications. And they looked at the variations between urban and rural areas and the time of day. There's a bit more of a detailed case study there, and I won't go into that detail, but you can see from the maps there that by presenting the findings in this really simple and visual way, they were able to get their message across and make policy recommendations for targeted interventions, such as variable speed limits at night in rural areas, because their analysis showed that whilst in urban areas the road traffic accidents were consistent regardless of the time, in rural areas they were concentrated at night. So that could influence particular interventions to address that, and also further traffic calming measures in urban areas, those kind of interventions. And if you're interested, I've also included a link at the top there to their 2020 report on road traffic accidents, so you can see how they fared against their targets. But within that case study, you can see that their rates are going down. I think that goes as far as 2015, but then the report takes you to 2020. And then, as well as policy, obviously data visualization is hugely important in operations and services. And this, I just think, is a really nice example from the Ministry of Justice, who produced a safety diagnostic tool. This image here is using mock data. This tool allows prisons to use near live data to delve into the causes of disorder and violence in prisons. And it lets them look with more nuance about where and when the violence is occurring and the nature of the violence. And this won an award, I think the Operational Research Society's President's Medal, this particular product. And because it's been hugely effective in enabling prisons to put interventions in place to stop the escalation of violence, by promoting a proactive rather than reactive approach to ensuring safety in prisons. Apparently before this, in prisons, prison officers had to sit with huge tables full of documentation and try to understand where the risks were, and this now makes it available to them at the push of a button. This tool is being used in all 122 prisons in England by 250 unique users every day. And there's a nice quote there, and there's I put in a link to, there's a sort of 15-minute video all about this on YouTube, which if you're interested you can have a look. And the next, this is I just want to talk particularly about user-centered design around Dataviz. So you're probably all familiar with this. I'd imagine you are. It's the Public Health England COVID-19 dashboard. Really fantastic piece of work. Provides the public and data professionals with up-to-date COVID data. Again, I'm not going to go into the design. There's a link there. You can, if you're not familiar with it already, you can have a really good look through it. There's lots and lots of really good stuff there. But I'm interested now to talk about the fact that they used a really user-centered approach to how they designed this dashboard. They conducted really quite large-scale qualitative and quantitative research, and they started out in that research by setting themselves the following questions: who the COVID-19 dashboard users are, which devices they use, and what they want to achieve. And the research involved surveys, one-on-one user research sessions with members of the public, data professionals, users with disabilities, and they also analysed over 23,000 emails sent to the feedback address. And as a result of this user-centered approach, as I mentioned before, this dashboard design evolved as they understood the changing needs. So they didn't have to wait until they had all the needs. They just got on with it. And then as they gathered more and more needs, they could introduce new features. For example, quite a recent one is that people can do searches by postcode. And this has all come out from gathering that needs, and it continues to evolve. And consequently, the usability, user satisfaction and trust have increased substantially over time, and there's some of their user satisfaction statistics there. And this last example I'm just going to touch on really quickly, because I know there's not much time, but just one particular note I want to make as a wider consideration in all of this is that once you have that understanding of your users, don't just consider the actual visualization of the data itself, but think about the wider picture in the story you want to tell with that data. So, for example, does it need a supporting narrative to go with the data visualization to explain the story the data is telling? And this is all about getting the balance right between the editorial and the data visualization and the design. I don't know if I've got time to click on that link. There's two, but I probably won't, because I don't want to use up too much time. But there's two links there to really great examples of where a supporting narrative is provided alongside an interactive data visualization. I think the technical term for this is scrolly telling. So the narrative, as you scroll through the narrative, new visualizations appear and you can interact with them. It's a really, really effective approach to telling the full story. That second link is from there was a competition that the NHS ran with the Nuffield Trust to invite people to do data visualizations around health, and the winner, the overall winner of that, is a really, really effective use of that scrolly telling and a supporting narrative. So that's just some quick examples, and now I just want to move on to finish off talking about what support there is for you, either whether you're an individual wanting to build your own skills, whether you want to build capability in an organization. There's a load of resources out there, so I won't talk about these in detail. There's a list of links there, both external free resources with guidance around best practice, design. There is the last link there is a blog from the ONS, what was previously digital, I can't remember what it was called now, but there was a dedicated Dataviz blog. Is now incorporated in the overall ONS corporate website. Some really lovely blogs there about some of the early things they did in the data visualization team in the ONS when they were experimenting and trying different things with data visualization. So that's worth a read. Then also more structured learning available. We work in partnership, the ONS Data Science Campus, work in partnership with the analysis function to deliver a learning hub, the ONS Learning Hub, which has a whole range of analytical learning available. And within that, there is a data visualization pathway. So there's if you are fairly new to this, there's an introduction to Dataviz, and then you can move on to specifics around visualizing with R and Python and more advanced methods. So that's a license. It's a free program, free learning modules, but you need a license. You can get a license from ourselves at the Data Science Campus by emailing that address on the screen there, or if you are a member of the GSS, the Government Statistical Service, then you can get a license through a slightly different route, but just get in touch and we can point you in the right direction. The GSS also have their own module, Introduction to Dataviz, which complements nicely the one on the Learning Hub. I would also recommend, it's not Dataviz, but Agile awareness, because again, the point I keep making about the effectiveness of an iterative process, it's worth looking at working with Agile methods to do that, and that has proven to be really effective. So the GDS, for example, there's lots of Agile training available. GDS Academy do an Agile awareness course. I've put a link there. And finally, a program that we lead at the campus, that my team leads, is the Data Science and Data Visualization Accelerator program. There's a link to the program there, and I'll just give you some of the key points around that. So this is a program where successful is a competitive process. Applicants submit a proposal for a real Dataviz project in their business area. If they are successful, they work on that project for 1 day per week for 12 weeks with the support of an experienced mentor that is provided to them, and they will be an experienced mentor from a government department or a wider public sector organisation. And in addition to the benefit of having the mentor to work on that project, they also benefit hugely from being part of a wider cohort of colleagues from across government and public sector. So they get a real sense of what's going on in other areas. There's lots of support from other mentors and other participants. And it's a really, really effective programme. The data visualization one is brand new. So we've just introduced our first ever cohort of that. It's on week 3, I think, of the current cohort. We've been running the Data Science Accelerator since 2015. But we recognised a need for a specifically data visualization program, so we're piloting that and trying that out at the moment. And projects, there's a list of the types of things. That's not an exhaustive list, but there's a list of the types of things that can be included for proposals for that. We are in the process of setting the dates for the next cohort, but it's likely to start with applications towards the end of January into February, with the project starting March to April, so spring next year. And we can we can let you know through relevant channels when dates are announced for that. So I think we're pretty much out of time. One final word I say just before I close and off for questions is that, as for organisations, in our experience, in my experience dealing with lots of stakeholders across government and public sector, for building, if you're an organisation or a leader wanting to build data science capability, or if you're an individual in an organisation where there isn't much capacity around you, you're a lone voice, and you're the only one doing this work or demonstrating these skills, starting with, there is lots of anecdotal evidence that organisations have started with a very small data viz project, often around business intelligence, because that's what catches the eye of the leadership, because that's when they can show nice pictures that show cost savings and things like that. That's where people have started, with one small data viz project. By showing it, sharing it, as I said, getting the attention of the senior leadership, showing the value of it, that's what's enabled them to take it to the next step and the next step. And a department I always quoted, the Ministry of Justice, now have one of the most effective data capabilities in government, and they started with one simple small data viz project that somebody did on their own MacBook under their desk, before they even had any capability at all. So that's the other side. The impact of data viz is for capability building, for organizational capability building. So at that, thank you very much, and happy to take any questions if there's time.
Okay, yeah, we've certainly got a couple of minutes. Thank you, Jane. If I hear myself back there. Yeah, if people want to put their hand up and ask some questions, I'll just say thanks. Lots of great examples there, Jane, for us. I think your last point is quite apt for us, because I think this network covers all the organisations in Essex, and there's some that are very small and perhaps don't have much capacity at all. So that advice there about picking sort of one particular project around data viz that's going to grab the imagination of the senior leaders to maybe then take that work forward is a really good one. And just we'll wait for any hands. There's one question in the chat from Steve, which is to do with that, and I think it's something we'd want to follow up with you in Essex. Really, is about the training that your national statistician was talking about in terms of for senior leaders. So it's around that really. And I guess Steve's question is, how bad do you think data literacy is outside of actual data teams? You know, what level of data literacy should we be aiming for in our senior leaders? If you've got any views in terms of what you've seen and what we really should be aiming for, because I think it's something we want to look at in Essex, but I guess we need to get our expectations right and pitch it just right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think we've been delivering the data masterclass since the end of last year. We piloted it at the end of last year, so it's still early days, and we're gathering feedback, and it's interesting because that really is aimed at non-analytical, non-technical leaders, but we think also leaders with analytical awareness can benefit from it as well, because the program, what leaders need, I think, is just they don't need the technical knowledge. They need to understand what's possible. They need to understand what their organisation can do with the data it has or that it can access. And they need to understand how that can enhance and improve and make more effective their decision making in their organisation. And they need to understand what they as leaders need to do to create the environment to let that happen. So as well as understanding, so they really, as a leader, they just need to understand the possibilities, the pitfalls, and they need to understand what can go wrong, how it can be done, what if they don't do it at all, or B, if they do it badly. So they need to understand that. And then they need to understand how they need to engage with their analytical teams to make this happen. And it's interesting, I get a couple of questions I get from people when we introduce the masterclass is the first thing they ask is, well, hang on a minute, the analytical leaders or the analytical teams ask, well, after our leaders have done this, are we going to have a queue of them knocking on our door with a shopping list of products that they want us to produce? And that's a really valid concern. But my answer to that is that shouldn't happen. What should actually happen is there's a queue of them knocking on your door, asking you what can they do to help you and to help enable this. They shouldn't be coming with a shopping list. And we hope that the masterclass we're delivering gets that message across, because threaded through it is the message that threads through is how they need to work with our analytical teams, but what they should be doing as leaders to enable this and create the environments that enable the use of data.
No, brilliant. Thank you very much. I think that's in your hands. So what I'm going to say, just because we'll sort of move on to the next presentation in a moment, is just a real big thank you. It's been a really good start to our session today. We'll circulate the PowerPoint as we do always in terms of with the video for this and the PowerPoint, so people can look at those links in terms of further reading and things. And just to say to everyone on the call, obviously, as ECTA, we're going to be continuing our conversation with Jane and her team in terms of how we can work together, look at things like the senior leader masterclasses, and see if we can get more people from Essex applying for the Accelerator program. So I think if anyone is thinking about that and they want to talk it through with the team at ECTA, please get in touch and we can talk through that and see if we can help in any way. Sort of, as I say, we've had a few people from Essex on the initial Accelerator program. It'd be great to see some more, I think. Oh, go on, Jane.
Yeah,
sorry.
Absolutely. And the one thing I would add to that is a request from me, if I may, is that as well as getting more people to apply for the Accelerator, if there is existing expertise and people who have expertise, then please encourage them to come forward as mentors, because the number of places we can offer on the programme is limited only by the number of mentors we have. Okay.
No, that's a really good call. And so I think as ECTA we can look for those people across. We've definitely got some across our system, so we can try and encourage. And no, thank you for that request, and we'll try and respond to that. So thank you very much, Jane. That's been great. Obviously, welcome to stay with us and listen to whatever. But you might have other meetings to go to. But if you want to stay with us, that's great. And at this point, I'd like to welcome Richard, who I've seen appear on my screen. Hi, Richard. So, as I mentioned earlier, Richard is Senior Performance Analyst at Essex Police. And we've talked a lot, the National, Jane and the National Statistician talks about the use of sort of dashboards. And Richard's going to talk about an interesting concept that they've got called Dashboard in a Day, and sort of bringing their business intelligence to life. But anyway, I'm probably not doing it justice, so I'll let Richard introduce that. And over to you, Richard. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. As assume you can hear me. Can you see my slides as well?
Yeah, got that. Thanks, Richard.
As introduced, I'm Richard Charnock. I'm the Senior Performance Analyst within the Performance Analysis Unit at Essex Police. Amongst other things, my kind of area of work sort of encapsulates a lot of our regular reporting and things. And dashboards have become increasingly a way of us kind of approaching that for reasons I'm going to kind of go through. And it's not just for necessarily bringing data to life, but we found it's helped a little bit with some of our demand on the department with the kind of desire to get regular data and things to support business processes and things. So given the title of Dashboard in a Day, I think it's probably possible, but it's one of the more it's probably a bit of a challenge, probably, because you tend to find that dashboards are kind of iterative things that might take days or months or weeks, and you go back and forth based on feedback. But I'm going to have a go at kind of going through a bit of background about our kind of internal reporting, how we approach dashboards, and how if certain things are in place, you probably could have a good go at doing one in a day anyway. So just moving on to kind of a bit of background around Essex Police's internal reporting. So within the Essex Police Force plan, we include a statement that we will use intel, data and evidence to make decisions. So obviously that means there's an expectation sort of that we'll be a data-driven organisation. We'll be using data to support decision making, to make us as kind of effective as possible when working towards our main efforts of supporting victims and kind of focusing on vulnerability, violence, and visible policing for Essex. Essex Police therefore has a bit of a thirst for data and analysis to fulfil regular requirements. So I think I counted yesterday, they've got close to 100 departments with hundreds more sub-teams, and speaking to our IT department, our main business intelligence tool's got kind of at least 180 systems that you can access from it, and I know there's more than that as well. So there's a huge amount of data, a huge amount of different processes, a huge amount of teams that want resources and information. So that's been a bit of a challenge for us over time in terms of demand on our relatively small group of analysts we have in Essex Police. So kind of historically, we would quite often have static Excel products that we would, as analysts, write a query, extract a set data set, put it in a template, kind of calculate it maybe with hundreds of sum ifs and count ifs and things like that, fix that and ship that around the force. Also do things like automated lists of data and tables, some self-service management information reports, so people could access and have limited kind of functionality around maybe picking their area, picking their crime type, getting some data out, and then if they have the technical skills, which is always a question, then presenting that. So when we move on, one of the advantages of dashboards is it's kind of done the charts and the tables for users that if your police obviously might not necessarily have the skills to take that data and present it in the way you wish. And there's also an awful lot of bespoke, one-time only, quite often reporting and data revisions. So people asking us for reports and data and charts and things to fulfil their report, or to inform a change process, or whatever it could be, management information, sort of performance management and things like that. There's many reasons why people would be asking, and that's why I've listed some of the limitations, both for our end users and for our analysts. So some of them kind of briefly touched on, but sort of fixed products, making it quite time consuming and impossible to answer your own kind of data questions if you're say a manager or an inspector on a team somewhere or something like that. Say you want to know the number of burglaries in a month, for example, that's quite easy to get, but if you wanted to dig into that further, that was a little bit more challenging. So I've mentioned as well a level of kind of technical expertise or some basic analysis skills to kind of use that data and present it in the best way possible and pull the key information from there. Not always obvious where, because we've got so many products going all over the organisation, not always obvious where to go for the right answer. And to be honest, they're not always the most visually appealing things. They're corporate products. If people ask for changes and things to them, it's quite a lot of effort to change them. So we've developed them for a particular fixed process or particular use case, which then might generate into, for analysts, those extra ad hoc requests to do bits of data revision, bits of ad hoc reporting, create some charts, create some tables. And we've just been generating an awful lot of ad hoc requests, limited on kind of time and things. We also started to run into a problem with some of our existing tools, not so much of an issue now, particularly around some of the versions of Excel we had previously. We would find products would corrupt and crash or take hours to calculate and things like that. So we started to consider dashboards as a solution a little while ago. By no means would we want to chuck away everything we've done previously. So lots of those fixed products, those lists and things that kind of help people with their day-to-day processes are quite useful. We keep some of them going. But a few years ago, we started looking around the possibility of sort of creating interactive dashboards with visuals and slicers and that kind of functionality that would allow users to get a little bit more than they could from our old products. So just a couple of early examples here, but for example, this one on the left, I don't know if you see my mouse cursor, is kind of all our teams and all our crime types and the volume of crime over time and things like that. If you just think if we put that into a fixed spreadsheet, you'd be looking at hundreds of rows and columns and things like that. So the same sort of job, but it's kind of a one-page summary. And then another limitation on the right is being able to, with dashboards, join lots of different data sets together and kind of getting away with some of the resource-intensive problem we were running into. So that domestic abuse one on the right kind of joins our crime and our incident data and some other stuff around survey data and domestic violence protection orders. And some of those many data sets, something that's quite good about dashboards is taking lots of complex data sets and joining them together and things like that. So that's what kind of the early Excel stuff looked like. And also, I guess, with Excel and probably similar spreadsheet products by rival companies, you've got quite a lot of functionality in that. So what we started to do with Excel was explore some of the kind of Power Pivot functionality, the data modeling and things you get alongside that. Kind of helps people in the team off their own back developing that using some of the open source information that's on the internet, on YouTube, those kind of places. And we kind of brought that together, developed some, and then kind of put together a little training package for the team. So most people were able to follow that exercise through and then reapply it into their work so they could create something similar. So there's a few limitations with kind of doing it with Excel in terms of it takes probably a little bit more time than some bespoke tools like Power BI, which I'm going to talk about next, to get some of the beautiful kind of visualizations and things. They kind of do it off the shelf. And again, at that point we were, and one of the examples I'll use later is one of those, but we were running into problems where products would corrupt and crash and things. So we started to look at what else was available. So we kind of we started looking at Power BI in part because it's on our kind of regional national development process around IT and what's kind of allowed and what's on the roadmap there. But also you can do quite a lot with the free version, and there's an awful lot of development and things you can do with it. So as you can see, some quite visually appealing examples there, kind of a forecast and a few charts and various drop downs and things to break the data up, and maps that people always seem to like on a dashboard because they can kind of see their area and dig into it. So lots of flexibility, lots of ability to handle very large data sets. And although at this stage, or at that stage in particular, we weren't particularly looking at live data, we were still going into our business intelligence system, running queries, putting them on network drives, and that's still typically what we do at the moment, while it's still a much quicker process than some of those old sort of systems and processes I talked about earlier, that regular reporting. So we've kind of got, I mean, it's probably not always a typical, but there probably is a kind of typical process you generally go through in these processes. Some of them you may go through more quickly, some of them you would spend a lot more time on, some of them are quite much more important than others. So this is the kind of typical process we go through when we're kind of developing dashboards. So probably I'm going to say your most important, but there's probably two most important steps. The first one is kind of understanding the requirements of the customer, what they want to get out of it, how the business works around that data item, that measure, and also what the limitations and the strengths of the data are, what you'll have to do to transform it down the line. If you can kind of get that right at the beginning, it makes the whole process a lot easier as you go through it. You then kind of have this step usually of the kind of wireframe and design. So based on what you've already found out from step one, kind of mock up what the dashboard is and go back and consult with your stakeholders, see whether they're happy with where you're going to go, because you wouldn't want to get all the way along here and then get to the point where it doesn't do what they want and have to kind of go back and see if you've got your data right at this point. Then based on these two steps, you start preparing your data and QAing it, make sure that kind of what the underlying data looks like is right, you've sorted any data quality issues out, you get your counts and your numbers, you've checked them against reputable sources, because again, the earlier you do that in the process, as long as your data it's really important to get your data right at that early point. If you can get it right, then you avoid some problems later down the line. At the data modeling stage, you start feeding it into the dashboard, joining your data sets together, creating those measures, those counts and things like that, which allow you to then build your visualizations, your charts, your tables, your maps, and all those kind of things that people see at the end. You know, obviously go through another cycle of testing that against a reputable source. So we might go back to one of those historic static products we know is absolutely right for, say, a counter crime, and use that to just validate our figures. Then you would obviously consult with the customer or the stakeholders again, just check they're happy with that. Then you can move to deployment, however you're going to do that, and you get a nice product at the end, hopefully. Should be said, this is quite often iterative processes. Sorry for not being able to get that out. You might go back to some of these, and you'll quite often find once people use it, they'll think of all the possibilities that they could have, the extra things they would like, or even things don't quite work, or they can't quite get the meaning from them as expected. So you will quite often go back into this kind of this process and start and then move back through it again. So that's fairly typical, really. So now I'm just going to show a few of our use cases. So there are a couple of use cases that some of our analysts have created. So the first one I'm going to kind of demonstrate is our diversity, equality and inclusion reporting. This one sort of supports our diversity, equality and inclusion strategy, kind of monitoring the understanding, protected characteristics and some particularly important volume types on our force systems. The analyst has got sort of set out the process and the problem here. So there was no one source of truth for diversity data across the force. We need to combine multiple data sources into one place. Again, a big advantage of the dashboards. In an easy to use self-service tool, which was filterable by, it's got ethnicity, age and gender there, so that we can be better informed about Essex Police's recording of protected characteristics on key systems to help inform that strategy. So this is the process that the analyst who created this went through. So there's lots of elements of that kind of general one I went through. Focus on some of it more than other bits, but so the first kind of things to consider are what data do you need, where do you want to get it from, the source of the database, existing products, how are you going to format it, doesn't need much extra formatting, what tool are you best going to use. So this is one in particular that was first created in Excel, but then corrupted and had to be started from the beginning, which is why the analyst who created this learned Power BI on the go, really, and there's nothing using kind of open source information and trial and error, really, because there's so much out there that until you get into it, almost doing is the best way of learning, I think, at times. And that's what we kind of did with that Excel process I mentioned earlier, is kind of do by learning, by creating something, really. She highlights step 2 as the most important, step 1 is the most important here, which is understanding your data, setting out in the best possible format, save a lot of time and frustration later on. Make sure you're happy with it before you start importing it into the software, Power BI in this instance. She felt in this example that a lot of the data manipulation was best done at source, so in our business intelligence tool and in Excel, but there's obviously quite a lot of power in Power BI to kind of do that thing as well. So step 2 is then that design phase, and then going back and consulting with the customer again about what it needs to look like, what graphics and visuals will work best. And then step 3 is actually getting into creating that data set. She's put learning how to use Power BI and creating the dashboard. So just in terms of what this one does, so it's used to aid the monitoring of volumes of crimes, arrests, stop searches by all those categories, and filterable by certain things: time period, local policing area, stop search reason, arrest reason. And it's intended to be a self-service tool, so it was kind of, it's probably simpler than some of the ones we created, which is probably no bad thing sometimes, but it was meant to be that it's got a consistent format throughout, which you'll see shortly when I show some screenshots. It's got a few simple charts and things that you hope that senior leaders would be able to pick up and use and understand, hopefully. Front page of all the different categories that it just asks you to click on. Something we learned, well, actually, something we learned with this after a while was that we added there's a couple of other pages that I don't show, but some explanation around the data types and things, so people know what they're looking at, how to use it as well. So we click through, and then we get into a consistent format throughout. So a bit of a trend up the top over time, so quite a long data series, so you can really see what things look like over time. And then a few very similar charts in the middle, looking at some of those key protected characteristics we record well in the middle, and then a few measures and things. So anywhere you click on here, it will refresh the rest of it. So if I was to click on, say, 507 at that peak there, all the other charts and things would update. Equally, there's loads of filterable options on the left. And what would the attempt to do with this was to try and make all the pages quite similar, so that they'd be fairly comfortable for the end users to use. So this is around volumes of hate crime, but there's also one around arrest reasons, and different options because it's a different system, but a similar look and feel, really. So a few lessons that were learned while creating it. One is that iterative process. It's not a quick process, so give yourself plenty of time to explore the data and experiment with visualizations. The importance of that, getting your data correct before you kind of load it in, regularly speaking to your customers to make sure it meets the brief, adding those caveats about what the dashboard does and does not do. That was definitely a lesson learned during the process, and some clear instructions of Power BI, but whatever the tool is, how you actually access it, how you interact with those visuals and things is really helpful. So use case 2, excuse me, is around hate crime. So again, a priority area for the force of vulnerability. It's obviously about hostility or motivation driven by kind of race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, or transgender sort of status, really. So this is a kind of area where the data underneath was quite well refined. It's kind of a good data source to begin with, but it was going out in lots of different products and things. We're already kind of working with our hate crime officers who had a task of providing the data we gave them into the independent advisory groups, who are kind of critical friends, I suppose, for Essex Police. They're members of the public, councillors, faith leaders, people like that who sit and kind of examine our hate crime amongst other things, really, and how Essex Police approaches those things. So we'll be working with the one of our area's hate crime officers to try and improve the amount and usefulness of the data supplied. But that kind of moved on to the superintendent with the hate crime portfolio, approaching the analyst to produce a dashboard in order to provide pertinent data to the officers in IAGs in an easy to understand format. So the kind of consultation development process is a little bit different compared to the last one. In terms of the data was quite well understood and kind of modelled. But they had kind of initial meeting with the superintendent to discuss the basic needs of the dashboard. So that's that consultation, drafting it out, making sure it all works, going back and consulting again. And in this case, an actual demonstration to get kind of direct feedback about it, which then went into a second draft, and then snagging. So that iterative process of making sure things work. One of the reasons for hate crime being in there is this was kind of a list of requirements, which I won't go through, but there's a huge amount there by lots of different factors, which would be, again, very difficult to have done in one of our kind of old historic kind of flat files. Really, it would have been a huge data set that would have been difficult for non-kind of data literate people to do much with, really. Or they would struggle, and they would come and ask those questions to analysts as a result, really, to say, can you help us with how many hate crimes are in Brentwood or whatever it happens to be. So just going through the visuals, a little bit different to the other. So this is a bit more bespoke each page. Again, some kind of basic things. And again, it's all interactive. So quite a nice graphic around here where you could say, click on one of the strands, say appearance, and it would recycle this and everything else would refresh, and you'd see your trends, sort of created dates and times, so you can filter by area and all those kind of factors that are quite useful. And that's around volumes. Similar, but slightly different, with some trends for around victims and who the victims are, and a lot of breakdown, the sort of information that our independent advisory groups would be quite interested in, making it as easy as possible to kind of get that information out for our hate crime officers. Again, something quite similar with the outcomes of crime and some trends and some volumes and some tables and charts and stuff. Again, all interactive. You can click on it and refresh things, change the time periods, get the answers you want, the bespoke answers, without coming to us to ask for that again, or struggling. And as mentioned earlier, maps are always quite appealing. So I've got quite a nice one there of hate crime by lower super output area. All clickable and all kind of highlighted by volume, and there's quite a nice sub functionality in this kind of sub report where you hover over and it will give you a little table. So if you're interested in this little red area, you can highlight it and you can just see what makes up the volumes, the hate crime strands there. So lots of functionality, quite visually appealing, and big step forward to what we had previously around hate crime. So kind of as a result of what we've done so far, to a certain extent, the nature of the requests we get have changed. We tend to get out of force boards, out of force leads for different areas, requests to create them dashboards rather than the same requests time and time again. And it's kind of something we're keen to expand upon ourselves. There are a few areas where we've still got areas to kind of work on and develop a little bit further. So as mentioned earlier, most of our we're still relying on kind of the team to go into our BI system, run a query, extract the data, host it on a network drive most of the time, and then point Power BI at that. We've got kind of a major project underway with a partner to look at moving our data into the cloud so we can access live data and kind of have that time saving of not having to refresh these products all the time, these dashboards. And also as part of that, we want to kind of explore a little bit more use some of those tools to kind of look at kind of text analysis and things. We've got a huge amount of data we're not necessarily utilising, and we think there's probably a lot more power out there in things like Azure and stuff like that we can use. Also found that this has been a bit not focused at times necessarily. We haven't prioritised the creation of the dashboards, so we would do with based on, say, a senior leader wanting something done, as opposed to looking at what is a forced priority, what will be the best time saving for us as a team potentially. So we're kind of working on that strategy at the moment, kind of grading dashboards, ordering them, collecting all the requirements and things like that. So that's going to be a part of what we do over the next year or so, I guess. Kind of possibly reflecting a little bit as well on the last presentation, but we've kind of let people kind of go with it and create what they feel is right in the situation, but there's probably lots of best practice we can apply, and perhaps corporate theme and stuff to kind of bring into our presentation of the data. Something our data scientists are quite keen on, but and it was mentioned again in the last presentation, we're creating all these measures, all these dashboards and stuff, but you're kind of relying on non-technical users, non-analyst users to understand this and take the right interpretation. So we had a little bit of discussion, which we haven't got very far on, but about some sort of data literacy program into the force to try and help people with how the best way of using dashboards is, and charts, and not just dashboards but also performance and what matters and what doesn't matter, and all those kind of things really. I'm also very much thinking about publishing some of our data externally in dashboards to give access to the public, and I'm sure of interest to some of the partner organisations represented here. We're kind of going through the information sharing stuff and the data impact assessment and all that at the moment, but we'd like to do that both for transparency and also because we hope it would be a way of reducing some of the demand we have from freedom of information on our department as well. If we publish a lot of our crime data, we can and other areas, we can hopefully just point them in that direction. They can have what they want then. So just returning to the original question of whether you can do a dashboard in a day. So I did a bit of work yesterday afternoon, which I think I could probably easily do in a day, but I think there's got to be a few things in place, a few of those issues we talked about. So you've got to, I've called it a mature data set, but you know your data really well. You know what the data quality issues are, you know what the gaps are, you know how you could format that quickly, or it's already something you use and something else that can just be fed straight into it. And I guess a clear and objective and scope, so something perhaps that may be self-generated as opposed to having to go back and forth with a stakeholder. So the example I had yesterday, I did a bit of work around Essex Police's kind of trends post-COVID lockdown release and things we noticed at a national level. So we feed data into a national operation every week, and then they send back a kind of national summary. And we've been doing that on an ad hoc basis, in that we'll go back into our data we've sent to the national board and pivot that about and create charts and do that kind of thing to answer the question, to see where Essex is different or not compared to the national trend. And I was just thinking yesterday, while thinking about this presentation, and that this would have been so much easier if I just put it into Power BI several months ago, and then we could just create those charts and do those sums and do those calculations. It's a really good data set. It's definitely possible to do in a day. I just haven't done it yet, really. And that is about it, really. So any questions, I guess?
That's brilliant. Thank you. Oh, thanks very much. That's great. There has been quite a lot of chat while you've been talking, and some of your colleagues, other people have been coming in and answering some of the questions, which is great. It's what the network's about. But I'll just get your reflection on it. So one of the questions was around, it's great to get that self-serve, and I guess there's something around some of our senior leaders and managers will be good at that, others won't. So there's a very basic question about, actually, if they don't use it, can you PDF and get it out to them? And some people, somewhat, because it's good to get your take on that, but someone said, yes, you can PDF it. You can set sort of email alerts out for things. But actually, probably the best way is to really encourage those senior leaders to be good enough to have that data literacy to use the dashboards themselves. So I guess the question on the back of that is, where do you think you're at? Are you encouraged that people are self-serving and taking that load off questions, ad hoc questions for you, or are they still needing to sort of be helped with it, really?
It's definitely mixed. So I was at a meeting this morning about that major project, and there was a big discussion about this. Can't just be a throw dashboards at people, because there'll be some people who are brilliant and love using them, and there'll be others that never do. It's got to be a real kind of change process for the organisation as well, and we're kind of on the edge of kind of going with that at the moment. can't remember what else the question was there. Yeah, so it's mixed. It's mixed at the moment, but we're well aware that you can't just produce loads of dashboards and expect everyone to use them, because some people just won't, and they will still come to you with those questions and things, really. So you've got to kind of either encourage them to go to those sources, have that kind of data literacy program, have a kind of training potentially around. There was a bit of that around that major project as well, how to use it. A few examples of video was produced as well. But yeah, you've got to have the change as well as an organisation as well in terms of approach.
And I think a good point that would lead into one of my questions, but Steve's put it in the chat as well, which is actually following on from Jane's presentation, and you've mentioned it, it's about that data literacy. And actually, you're thinking about doing something around that, the police. It's probably something that we could think about across public sector in Essex and work together on, because I think all organisations are probably thinking that same thing. It's like, we're producing all these bits of analysis, these dashboards. How do we get our senior leaders to have that data literacy to be able to engage in the right way? So I think it's something for Hector to think about, is actually how can we help Essex Police, County Council, District Councils all have that conversation. So I think that's one for us to sort of take away from today, I think. And just before we sort of wrap up, and thanks to everyone, by the way, for all the sort of hints and tips in the chat about Power BI. That's really useful for people. But in terms of training, it sounds like sort of your guys, and I think it's the same for a lot of organisations, with things like Power BI coming in, it's more been around people just trying it out and practicing rather than sort of formal learning. So it's not just on Power BI, it's probably other things that actually, again, Hector could join up on to share good practice as we find, as we try new things and new techniques.
Yeah, we kind of had one formal training course with a provider, but that was kind of like the technical provider rather than anyone you could go and kind of procure the training from them as such. Yeah, it was useful, but we would probably like more of that as well, particularly for you're going to have people in your teams who love like diving in and learning for themselves, and other people who are a bit more tentative and need that kind of hand-holding, I suppose, or that help initially to kind of get them going, really.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Richard. Really interesting. I think a lot of our colleagues have sort of taken a lot from that and sort of given us food for thought about some things Hector can help all organisations with. So yeah, thank you very much. So we're just going to move on to our final presentation. I think this is with Dr. Dave Clark, who's a research fellow at University of Essex. I think, as he explained in the video I'm about to show you, he's had to go away just to do his school run, but I do have his presentation recorded, and he's going to join us for some questions at the end. So I'll let him introduce himself on his video, and he's talking to us about data visualization, particularly in R. And this is something Dave does as part of the summer school at the university run. So perhaps at the end we can then think about, well, actually, if people are interested in what Dave shows us in the presentation, how can we actually get more people on that sort of the course and learning about visualization with R. So let me just try and share that with you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for having me to speak at your event about data visualization in R. I'll start with a quick apology that I can't deliver this talk live. Unfortunately, I've got an unavoidable school run clash, so I'm hoping to join you shortly after the talk to take any questions you might have. And my contact details are on the slides as well, so I'll be more than happy to look at any questions you have if you get in touch. So let's begin with me. Okay, so yeah, my name's Dave Clark. I'm a research fellow in the Institute of Analytics and Data Science at the University of Essex, and I'll be talking you through some data visualization in R material today. So I just want to start off by thinking about why we visualize data and why would we do this in R? Well, primarily, we visualize data because statistics are hard to understand. As analysts or statisticians, we can probably just about get by communicating means, variances, effect sizes, and statistical power. But as soon as we start talking to people outside of our rather specialist field, that communication breaks down. And so having a plot or some visualization of your data or the trends in your data means that we can communicate across those boundaries much more easily. Plots can also alter people's behaviour, and a good example of that is the plots we've seen throughout the COVID pandemic, showing the trends in the data over time, and using those to emphasise why certain restrictions have been necessary. And so whenever we're thinking about plots, and particularly when we're communicating with the public, we need to be really cautious that our plot is communicating the message we think it is. And that's a theme that will emerge numerous times over this talk. So where would we use R for visualization purposes? Well, in my opinion, R offers three huge advantages that over other packages. The first is scalability, and we're exceptionally good at collecting data nowadays, and that means the data sets are getting bigger and bigger. And so we need a tool that will scale to analyze and visualize very large data sets. R as a programming language is also highly reproducible. By keeping a script, we've got an open and transparent record of everything we've done for an analysis. And so it's a very open way of analyzing data. R is also very flexible. R is based on packages, and there are well over 18,000 different packages now for R. So no matter what sort of specialist analysis or data you're working with, there'll almost certainly be something already in existence to help you with your analysis. Very flexible language. R has many different plotting options. The base graphics, I've got an example here in the middle, and that's made by this top line of code, is very basic as it sounds, but is ideal for checking things like statistical assumptions or exploring trends in your data. So any visualization where you're not really worried about formatting the plot too much. We've also got this lattice package, and this is builds on R's base graphics by allowing you to facet the data or split it according to some categorical variable in your data. And third, and what I'm going to focus on today in this talk, is the Ggplot2 package. And this represents, in my view, the best balance between flexibility and power versus ease of use. And for consistency, I'll be using this example dataset, the penguins dataset, throughout to sort of build plots. So the Ggplot2 package is based on this grammar of graphics approach by Hadley Wickham. And this basically involves us iteratively building plots by adding layers to those plots. And those layers are the data, the aesthetics, the geometric objects, scales, and facets. And over the next few slides, we'll explore each of these in turn and see how, by building them in this formulaic way, we can highly customize our plots to our needs. If you're interested in finding out more about Ggplot in your own time, this free online textbook by the Ggplot developer Hadley Wickham is an excellent place to start. So to build a basic plot, we must define the following three things. So we first have to call Ggplot and define the data we want to plot for. We then have to define the aesthetics using this AES function, and this controls which variables are being mapped to which attribute on our plot. So in this simple example, I've just defined the variables that are going on the X and Y axes. We then add a geometric object, and this geometric object determines what is the actual plot that we're making. In this example, I've used geoPoint, and this will plot a simple scatter plot. We can combine multiple geomes, and we can overlay multiple geomes on top of each other depending on the order as well. So we can mix and match to make all sorts of fancy plots. This is a good overview of some of the geometric objects available to us in Ggplot I found online, and shows a range of the sort of objects we can plot based on whether we're working with 1 or 2 variables, whether we're working with continuous or categoric variables. And of course, like I just said, we can combine these to create any number of highly customized plots. As well as obviously the X and Y axes, we can also map the aesthetics of our plots to various variables as well. So we can change things like colors. In this instance, I've changed the color of the points and the smooth lines on this plot to correspond to the different penguin species in our data set. And being able to map colors, shapes, or line types to variables in our data set is a really nice way of visualizing differences between groups, categorical variables. We can also map colors and point sizes, for example, to continuous variables in our data to show how things change along gradients. And all of these colors, line types, shapes, etc., can be manually specified using these generic scale manual functions. So if we wanted to provide particular colors for this plot, we could use the scale color manual function and provide just a vector of values that we want. When we're thinking about colors in particular, I would urge you to be very cautious in your use of color and avoid it if possible. The reason for that is just under 5% of people globally suffer from some form of color vision deficiency. And so that means that color combinations like red and green, or colors with poor contrasts, should really be avoided, as they can be completely indiscernible to some members of your audience. When we're thinking about predefined palettes that we could use, and some of these are designed particularly with color vision deficiency in mind, this Paletteer package is excellent as it unites many of the hundreds or thousands of predefined palettes into one easy to use package that you can use with Ggplot. And here I've got an example of how I've used this Simpsons themed palette on this plot here. We could also make our own palette using hex codes or RGB values if we wanted to as well. So it's very flexible. We then might want to think about axes and labels and how we format those. And so we could transform our axes in some way, and Ggplot allows you to do all of the common log transformations or square root transformations on your axes, or define your own. Again, be very cautious because those can be very hard to interpret, particularly for a non-specialist. Many people ask me whether Ggplot can be used to do things like interrupted axes and dual axes. The answer is yes, it can, but it's very fiddly, and that's with good reason. It's because it's strongly discouraged by this grammar of graphics approach, which seeks to simplify things and use things like color or point shapes to map to additional variables rather than having multiple axes. We can also add things like axis titles using the labs function. So in this plot, I've limited the x-axis to between 40 and 50, as you can see. And Ggplot will automatically add a little buffer either side, so you don't end up with half points on the edges of your plot. And using the labs function, I've changed the x and the y-axis titles, and also the legend title in this case. So once we're happy with our plot and we've formatted all the data elements of our plot and changed the axes and the scales accordingly, we can then start to really fine-tune our plot. And the way we do this is using these theme settings, or by changing the theme. So Ggplot has numerous themes that we can use, and these broadly change the look of our plot. So In this case, I've used this theme BW function, which provides us this nice sort of clean, classic looking plot. And then I've used these theme settings to really fine tune specific parameters. I've made the axis text and the axis titles slightly larger. And I've also removed these grid lines that are in default Ggplots, as I find them rather distracting. And using these theme settings, we can define our own custom themes. So if we're making lots of plots and we want them to all look identical, we can use the same theme settings across all those plots. Nice, consistent look. Once we're happy with the formatting of our plot, we might go ahead and do things like faceting. So we saw an example of a faceted plot earlier when we looked at the lattice package. And in Ggplot, faceting is done using this facet wrap function. You'll notice the tilde symbol here, which in R means by or as a function of. So this line of code says we're splitting the plot by the penguin species. You can see it's created a panel for each of the penguin species in that data set. This is really good for reducing the sort of visual clutter inside each plot. And if we're not wanting the audience to compare between groups, but to focus instead on the individual trends in the data set, faceting is a really nice way of achieving that. The axis ranges as well, you'll notice for each of these panels is exactly the same, even though the range of the data are quite different. And that can be set to vary if we want. So we could have each panel much more focused on the range of the data if we wanted to as well. So when we've built our plot, you can see how we've gone from a very basic scatter plot through to this highly customized faceted plot that we've ended up with. We would save that as an object in R using the classic assignment arrow that those of you who use R will be familiar with. And we can write it to a file. So we don't copy and paste the output of our graphics, as that's not a very versatile way of doing it, and it's not reproducible. Instead, we use this ggsave function, and we first of all give it a file name to create the new file. We tell it which object we want to plot. So in this case, I've called it my plot. We give it dimensions. These are by default in inches. And we tell it the file extension or file type that we want. And using ggsave, we can create a number of different file formats, for example, vector graphics based like PDFs or EPSGs, or pixel based like PNGs or JPEGs. And so that's how we would go from quite a basic plot to creating a file of our highly customized plot. But one of my favorite things about Ggplot are some of the excellent extension packages that allow us to move even further beyond these basic plots. And so in the previous slide, we saw how faceting is quite a good way of arranging plots next to each other when they're related in some way. But if they're unrelated in some way and we want to build a panel of independent plots, we've got two very good extension packages for Ggplot, and these are Ggplot and the Patchwork package. And it's the Patchwork package in particular that I really like. This allows us to arrange plots next to each other, either horizontally using the plus symbol or vertically using these forward slashes. A brief example here, I've got two different plots that I've created. And by using the plus symbol, I've arranged them next to each other. And I've also added this annotation to them to add these automatic plot tags to them. And you can see it's done a great job of aligning the plot regions exactly. And it's also aligned the axis labels as well. So everything looks clean and consistent and really nicely formatted. If we're presenting to an audience in some form of digital format, as we are here, we might want to animate our plots in some way. So this is really great for showing any form of time series data where you've collected measurements at different times. This can be done using the Animate package. And it allows us to create independent plots for each time slice in our data and then loop through them in some way. And we can customize the type of animation, how the data transitions from one frame to the other, the timings of the animation, and how it renders. And a very simple example here I've got is of the new cases of COVID in the UK over the last sort of year and a half or so. And so we can create quite nice animations that very visually show changes in time. And so that was a really quick whistle-stop tour of Ggplot and some of its extension packages. And hopefully I've convinced you that it's a really great and versatile package for data visualization. Using this formulaic approach to building plots and building up the layers each time, it actually becomes quite intuitive once you've gotten over the initial learning curve. And it's also very customizable. It allows you to really fine-tune the aesthetics of your plot. And anything that you find difficult in Ggplot has usually been designed to be that way, usually because it might make your plot less interpretable. We saw some of the excellent extension packages like Patchwork and Animate, which really extend the functionality of Ggplot. And there are numerous other ones we could talk about if we had more time. Most of all, what I find Ggplot has done for my sort of data visualization mindset is it's shifted my thinking from worrying about how I build plots to should I make this plot, and really concentrating on the message that my plot's giving, rather than worrying how to actually make it. If you're interested in finding out more about using R for data analytics and data science, or specifically about using things like Ggplot, I highly recommend checking out our Iods Analytics and Data Science Summer School. So this runs every summer. Registration usually opens sometime in the spring with lower rates the earlier you register. And it's a 2-week course that incorporates a whole range of data science topics, not just R. But I teach quite a lot on the R theme in that summer school. And we talk about a number of topics in our first week, in the introduction to R. And then the second week, we move on to the advanced data visualization, so talking about Ggplot in some detail, and other more specialist topics as well. So if you want to find out more about that, I would strongly recommend you check out this website, or you can shoot me any questions via email or via Twitter. So hopefully I will join you very shortly to take any questions live as soon as I'm back from the school run. And in the meantime, I'll thank you very much again for having me, and have a nice day.
Brilliant. Thanks for sharing that for me, Steve. Saved me there. My technology let me down. So just before we come to David, coming back to join us for any questions, I'm just going to invite Rachel, who went on the summer school this year that Dave was talking about there. So it's just Rachel, if you just want to give us any reflections about how you found the course and anything you particularly took away from it.
Yeah, sure. So I guess from the flip perspective of someone that went along on the summer school, I only did a few of the days, the ones that focused specifically on data visualization. But I think the first thing I'd say is don't be put off if you're not already an R expert, because I wouldn't consider myself an R expert. I'm not that confident in R yet, but I still found it really useful, really helpful, and actually it was a really good starting point because it gives you some kind of idea of where you're going towards, and there's definitely some kind of learning that I picked up that I want to try and incorporate. So I would say that don't be put off if you don't use R too much already, and if you are already using R kind of as an analysis tool, or you're kind of starting to use it for analysis, then I'd kind of recommend it it really makes sense to start looking at the data visualization side as well, because kind of, as some of we've touched on earlier today, it makes a really big difference in terms of how easy it is and how effective it is once you start to kind of communicate your findings and your data, and actually kind of learning that visual side in R is going to be really useful in terms of saving that time and effort when you might otherwise have to kind of export all your data out and then visualize it in another package and kind of be flipping between the two. So I think definitely worth a look, whether you use R loads or not really yet, either way, and there's a lot to take away. I think some of the main benefits, which obviously have just been touched upon, but for me, that kind of layered approach to the graphics is really, really helpful. And I hadn't particularly thought of visualizations in that way before, but it allows for a lot more customization than some of the other tools that we use, which is obviously a huge benefit. It's not necessarily something you'd want to do for every single chart that you make, but it can be really, really effective. And I think it was some of the COVID charts that were in some of the examples from the beginning today, use that kind of annotations and kind of pulling out kind of mini charts and the smaller embedded charts, things like that, boxing off or putting a line in to show kind of when an event happens. Those sort of things you can build up kind of as layers to your visual, which is really, really helpful, and it just gives you a lot of customization that you might not necessarily have in some other tools. So I'd say that is really helpful and something that we can really use to kind of help people that aren't as data literate, and to kind of help explain and kind of make our charts more kind of accessible. So I guess just in summary, really, it is a bit of a learning curve, and it's probably more kind of time investment up front than perhaps in Power BI or kind of other tools, but I do think it is worth exploring, and there's definitely kind of some aspects that are really helpful that we don't necessarily use too much at the moment, or that we might have to kind of engineer in other ways. You know, you can add text boxes and you can add annotations later, but actually building that in as part of your visual can be really effective, and obviously it gives you kind of a lot of options to make something that's really polished and really useful. So yeah, I recommend it if anyone is thinking about going on the summer school. Go for it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rachel. It's really helpful. I say it's good to hear from someone who's already been on that. It'd be really good to encourage other people to look at that. And perhaps, you know, if we get enough interest, we would talk to the university about actually putting something else on prior to the summer school, perhaps on particular topics that we're interested in. And this one seems to have captured people's imagination. I'm just going to check. Dave, are you back on the call yet? Can't see. I'm having a few technical problems, so I'm trying to see the list of people. See, David's going to try and rush back, and he said he'd be back about 3:40. So just any particular questions for him. But if Dave's not on the call, what I'll do is I'll sort of pass the comments back to him. But I think the main thing I want to put across is actually, if people are interested in this, to let us know. And as I say, perhaps we can have a conversation with the university. We don't need to wait for the summer school. If there's something that actually we're interested in putting on for different people across the public sector in Essex, then perhaps that's something Hector can talk to the university about. So as I say, if you are interested, let me or the Hector team know, and we'll see what we can do. Without David here, I think we have come to the end of our 3 presentations. So it's like to finish up with a few small bits of admin. First bit is obviously I want to thank our speakers. It's been great. I think it's been a really good session with lots of different sort of topics or things related to visualization presented. 2 final things from me. One, we have a show and share booked in for 19th October. So we'll send out a hold the date entry to your diaries quite soon. But if there's anything you want to showcase from your organisation, please let us know. And the next Be Part of the Equation event like this is scheduled for Tuesday the 23rd of November. Again, we'll send out a hold the date calendar invite very shortly. But again, data visualization was one that some people had asked for. This is why we put this on. So I think it's your network. So to get the best out of it, feed into myself, Claire, Emma, any of the ECTA team in terms of what you would like covered in the next Be Part of the Equation event, and we will do our best to put that on for you. Just one final thing, just to sort of flag up is, and Claire wanted me to mention, people, if you want to find more on about our methods board. So Anna really found it useful to come to our methods board, which runs once a month when looking at sort of her domestic abuse analysis. So just really want to flag that if actually you've got a piece of work that you want to sort of come and bring to our methods board, then please again get in touch with us and we can hopefully get you on the agenda for that. And like Anna did, hopefully you'll find that really useful. Oh, I see David appeared on my screen. So just before we were just about to sign off, David, but now you're there. I'll just feedback. So I think, thank you very much for your presentation. I think everyone found it really useful. We've got a lot of sort of things in the chat which I can copy and paste to you later. But I guess the main thing was, if people are interested, obviously there is the summer school, but what I was saying is perhaps because there seems to be quite a lot of interest, perhaps there's something we can talk to you and Alex about in terms of perhaps, you know, something for the different people in different organisations. If there's enough people we could put together to perhaps run something, you know, prior to the next summer school running, you know, would that be possible that we could talk to you outside of the meeting about if that was possible?
Yeah, it certainly sounds possible. If you want to do sort of a more focused version of the material in the data science school, for instance, or something specifically on data visualization, yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. And I think yeah, people were sort of chatting putting stuff in the chat as you were talking, particularly about some of the sort of advice you were giving on particular colours, and I think some people, Rachel, who you might be able to see on the screen there, also gave us a bit of a talk that she'd been obviously on your summer school, so I was talking it from a sort of her perspective about how interesting and useful she found it. So as I say, hopefully we've got some interest there across other organisations that will either say come to next summer school or come to something that we perhaps could put on this topic, as it sort of caused quite a bit of interest.
Wonderful. Yeah. I'll be happy to send around any developments for next year's courses and when I get them.
Brilliant. So and now we've got your presentation on a video. If you don't mind, what I'll do is like I've done with the other presentations on this session, I'll send that round to people. So as I say, if you don't mind, if people do think of questions or people who weren't able to come today see it and they feed any questions through to me, if that's okay, David, I'll be in touch with those.
Yeah, certainly. That's absolutely fine.
Perfect. Okay, so just back up to my wrapping up bit. So just want to highlight the methods board, that people know about that, and then the show and share in October, and the next Be Part of the Equation event in November. So just to reiterate, any topics that you think we should be covering, or anything you want to showcase in the show and shares, please let us know. Other than that, thank you everyone. I know everyone's really busy, 2 hours a day. Hopefully you found it valuable and as interesting as I have. And yeah, nice to see you all, and see you soon. Thanks very much. See you later, David. Thank you very much.